were talking about if a discipline were to sort of get its act together, is there a discipline that you can point to that has perhaps its act together?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are a couple, at least in a narrow way, and just sort of using a glib term like getting its act together really is very unfair, because some of it has to do with funding.
Sure.
Some of it has to do with the character of a discipline. For example, there are some disciplines. Well, let's take a couple of actual examples and look at them. So if you're a high energy physicist, you get to build, one monster thing every 20 years or so. And it costs really a lot of money, and basically all the high energy physicists in the world kind of get together, build a consensus that the thing to do this decade is a Large Hadron Collider at CERN. And you get very organized about how you're going to share the data that comes out of that with various researchers around the planet, where you're going to store it, the sort of rules for getting credit for experiments that are run on there. And that's a very sort of, large scale, centralized sort of thing. Contrast that with sort of cottage industry science, where every individual researcher, or maybe it's a PI with a postdoc and 3 graduate students, is kind of doing their own thing. There you may have much less centralization. Some other fields, though, that are used as sort of examples of fields that have done very well are astronomy, where there are very good sort of central databases of astronomical observations now that are shared. And in fact, they are using data collection strategies that build those databases preemptively through sky surveys, so that you can then come back and work on them. Jim Gray used to say astronomy is the best science for data stuff, because there's no personally identifiable information, and there's no commercial value. The occasional really nice picture of the Crab Nebula that somebody makes a poster out of. Contrast that to things that sort of sit around the edges of the pharmaceutical industry, for example. Now that's an interesting case in point, because genomics has sort of got its act together too, in part because it's very, very well funded centrally through organizations like the National Institutes of Health, through the National Library of Medicine, and there's a big sort of replicated international database called GenBank in the US, where people deposit sequences. On the other hand, GenBank is misunderstood in some ways, because people tend to say, okay, there's GenBank, so the genomics folks have solved their problem. GenBank is only the place where you put a very specific kind of templated data that's part of your experiment. So these folks generate tons of other data that has no natural home right now, and that's being parked at individual labs.